My parents chose my abusive sister when I protected everyone for decades, so I went silent, took my money back and let chaos follow them. I'm a 34-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my job in my family was to absorb the damage so everyone else could pretend we were normal. From the outside, we looked quiet, functional, even close. Inside the house, though, it felt like living next to a fault line that could split open at any moment. That fault line was my older sister. She had violent outbursts that came out of nowhere, screaming fits, thrown objects, doors slammed hard enough to crack the frames. Sometimes it was emotional manipulation, sometimes it was physical. She'd corner my mom in the kitchen, towering over her, voice shaking with rage. Other times, she'd lash out at my dad, calling him useless, weak, a failure. When she turned on me, it was colder. Insults whispered close to my face. Nails digging into my arm. Threats delivered quietly so no one else could hear. By the time I was a teenager, I learned how to intervene without making things worse. I'd step between them, hands up, voice calm, saying things like, "It's okay, I've got it," even when my heart was pounding. I learned how to hide bruises under long sleeves. How to joke things away when relatives asked why everyone looked tense. How to clean up shattered glass before anyone came home so it didn't become a scene. My parents leaned on me constantly. Emotionally, I was their anchor. Financially, I helped however I could once I started working. Meanwhile, every excuse in the book was made for her. She's stressed. She's been through trauma. She doesn't really mean it. I was told to be patient, to understand, to not provoke her. Somewhere along the way, protecting the family stopped being something I chose. It became who I was. Silence was expected from me, silence about what happened, silence about how it felt, silence about the resentment slowly building in my chest. And back then, I truly believed that if I kept everyone safe long enough, that loyalty would eventually come back to me. As I got older, I learned that shielding everyone didn't just mean stepping in during explosions, it meant shrinking myself the rest of the time. I stopped talking about my own problems because there was always a bigger crisis waiting to happen. If I had a bad day, it stayed in my head. If I was hurt, I swallowed it. The unspoken rule was simple: my feelings were optional, hers were emergencies. At family gatherings, I became hyper-aware of her moods. The second she walked into a room, I scanned her face for warning signs: tight jaw, shallow breathing, that twitch in her eye that meant something was about to go wrong. I'd hover nearby, pretending to check my phone or help in the kitchen, ready to redirect a conversation or pull someone away before it escalated. "I'll talk to her," I'd say quietly, like it was my responsibility. And no one ever argued. Behind closed doors, my parents confided in me like I was a third parent. My mom would whisper late at night, sitting on the edge of my bed, asking, "What do we do with her?" My dad would sigh heavily, rubbing his temples, telling me, "You're the only one she listens to." It felt like praise, but it came with chains. Every time they said it, the weight on my shoulders got heavier. Meanwhile, my sister knew exactly how much power she had. She'd apologize just enough to reset the clock, then explode again weeks later. If I tried to set boundaries, she'd accuse me of abandoning her. If I stayed quiet, she'd accuse me of judging her. Either way, I was the villain in her story, and I learned that peace only existed if I played along. I started missing out on things, friends, relationships, opportunities, because I was always needed at home. Any time I tried to pull away, something would happen. A fight. A breakdown. A phone call telling me I had to come back because things were bad. Still, I kept telling myself this was temporary. That families were complicated. That sacrifice meant something. That one day, someone would notice how much I was holding together. I didn't realize yet that disappearing for everyone else was slowly erasing me, or that the cost of my silence was about to get much higher. The first time I tried to draw a real boundary, it didn't even feel dramatic to me. It felt small. Reasonable. I had just gotten a promotion at work, which meant longer hours and more responsibility, and I told my parents I couldn't be on call all the time anymore. I remember standing in the living room, the air heavy and still, saying, I need to focus on my own life a little. My voice was calm, almost apologetic. My mom's face felt like I'd just betrayed her. But what if something happens, she asked immediately. My dad didn't look at me at all. He stared at the TV, jaw tight, and said, you know how your sister is. That sentence carried everything. Fear. Guilt. Expectation. It was a reminder of the role I was never supposed to question. When my sister found out, she didn't yell at first. She laughed. A short, sharp laugh that made my stomach drop. So you're abandoning us now, she said, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. When I tried to explain, she stepped closer, her voice lowering. You think you're better than us? The accusation hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Over the next few weeks, every interaction became tense. If I didn't answer a call right away, my phone would blow up with messages. If I did answer, she'd be icy or passive-aggressive, making comments like, must be nice to have a life. My parents started hinting that things were worse lately, and that maybe my distance was making her spiral. I started doubting myself. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe this was what being the strong one actually meant, sacrificing indefinitely. I found myself apologizing for things I hadn't done, just to calm everyone down. The boundary I tried to draw blurred almost immediately. One night, after another tense dinner where no one met my eyes, my mom quietly said, we just need you to be patient a little longer. And as I drove home, gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt, I had a sinking feeling that patience was just another word for never, and that something was building beneath the surface that I wouldn't be able to stop. The night everything crossed a line, it didn't start with shouting. It started with that eerie quiet that always meant something was wrong. I had stopped by my parents' house after work because my mom sounded shaky on the phone. The living room lights were dim, the TV on mute, and my sister was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. No one said hello when I walked in. I asked what was going on, keeping my voice neutral, already bracing myself. My sister stopped pacing and stared at me like I'd just insulted her. You think you can just show up and fix things now, she snapped. I hadn't even said anything yet. My mom stood near the kitchen doorway, hands clenched together, eyes darting between us. My dad sat on the couch, rigid, saying nothing. When my sister started yelling, it escalated fast. Accusations flew, about me, thinking I was better, about choosing work over family, about abandoning her when she needed me most. I tried to de-escalate, repeating, I'm here, okay? I'm here. That's when she shoved me. Hard. My back hit the wall, knocking the air out of my lungs. For a second, everything froze. I remember the sound of the clock ticking, way too loud. My mom gasped but didn't move. My dad finally stood up, but only enough to say her name in a warning tone. My sister stepped closer, face inches from mine, breathing hard. Don't ever turn your back on me again, she said through clenched teeth. Instinct took over. I put my hands up, not to fight, just to protect myself. I backed away slowly, heart racing, feeling something inside me crack. This wasn't emotional chaos anymore. This was physical. And everyone saw it. After she stormed off to her room, my mom rushed to me, checking my arms, whispering, she didn't mean it. My dad sighed and said, you know she has issues. No one asked if I was okay. No one said sorry. I drove home in silence, my body aching, my mind numb. When I looked at myself in the mirror later and saw the red mark forming on my shoulder, a terrifying thought hit me, if this was what protecting them looked like now. I didn't know how much more I could take. After that night, something shifted, not just in me, but in the rules I was expected to live by. No one talked about what happened. Not really. The shove, the threat, the look in her eyes, it was all treated like an unfortunate misunderstanding, something better left buried. My mom would call and ask how work was going, her voice careful, like she was afraid to touch the wrong subject. My dad avoided me entirely for a while. My sister, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened. She'd text me random things, memes, updates about her day, casual questions, as if she hadn't pinned me against a wall weeks earlier. When I didn't respond right away, she'd send follow-ups dripping with sarcasm. Busy saving the world again? Guess family doesn't matter anymore. Each message made my chest tighten. I tried bringing it up once. Just once. I told my mom I wasn't okay with what happened, that it scared me. She went quiet for a long moment, then said softly, "We can't make this worse." I remember staring at the wall while she spoke, realizing that worse didn't mean unsafe. It meant uncomfortable. It meant facing reality. That's when it hit me, my silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was enabling the damage. Every time I swallowed my fear, every time I let it slide, I was teaching everyone, including myself, that my safety came last. I started sleeping poorly, waking up tense, replaying that shove in my head. Loud noises made me flinch. My phone buzzing sent a jolt through my body. Still, I kept showing up. For birthdays. For dinners. For emergencies that always seemed to involve her. I told myself I was being mature. Responsible. But deep down, resentment was rotting something inside me, and I could feel it spreading. The worst part was realizing that if it happened again, if she hurt me again, I knew exactly how my parents would react. They'd minimize. They'd excuse. They'd expect me to forgive. And for the first time, a dangerous question crept into my mind. What would happen if I stopped protecting everyone, and let the truth come out? By the time I realized I was living in a constant state of tension, it felt too late to untangle myself cleanly. My body reacted before my mind did. I'd tense up pulling into my parents' driveway. My shoulders stayed tight during every phone call. Even when things were calm, I felt like I was waiting for a bomb to go off. That was my normal now. I started rehearsing conversations in my head, things I wanted to say but never did. I imagined telling my parents that what happened wasn't okay. That I was afraid. That I couldn't keep being the buffer anymore. In my head, I was calm and firm. In reality, every time I opened my mouth, the words died somewhere between my chest and my throat. My sister sensed the shift before anyone else. She always did. One night, she cornered me outside while I was taking out the trash. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting my lungs. "You've been acting weird," she said, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "You talking about me behind my back?" Her tone wasn't loud, but it was threatening in that familiar way. I told her no. It was automatic. A lie built on years of survival. She stepped closer anyway. "Good," she said quietly. "Because you know what happens when people turn on me." The implication hung there, heavy and unmistakable. When she walked away, my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the trash bag. That was the moment I realized there would never be a right time to speak up. No perfect opportunity. No gentle resolution. The family dynamic depended on my compliance, and any attempt to change it would be seen as betrayal. My parents kept asking me to hang in there, to be the bigger person, to not provoke her. Each request sounded less like love and more like a warning. They didn't need to say it out loud, I knew exactly what they expected from me. And standing there alone afterward, heart racing in the dark, I understood something terrifying. If I didn't choose myself soon, someone else was going to decide how far this could go. Rock bottom didn't come with fireworks or a dramatic blow-up. It came quietly, on a random weekday evening, when my mom called me crying. She said my sister had locked herself in her room, screaming that no one cared about her, that everyone was against her. Before I could even respond, my mom said the words I already knew were coming, "Can you please come over? She listens to you." I remember sitting on my couch, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. My body felt heavy, like gravity had doubled. I told her I couldn't. I said I was exhausted. That I needed a night to myself. There was a long pause, then my mom's voice cracked. "I don't know what we'll do without you," she whispered. The guilt hit me like a punch to the chest. I went anyway. When I arrived, my sister exploded the second she saw me. She screamed about how selfish I was, how I'd changed, how I thought I was better than everyone. She knocked over a chair, sending it crashing into the wall. My dad shouted for her to stop. My mom cried. And just like always, all eyes slowly turned to me. "Say something," my mom pleaded. Something inside me broke. I realized I was standing in the middle of the same scene I'd been trapped in since I was a kid, same roles, same chaos, same expectations. Except this time, I felt empty. Not angry. Not scared. Just completely drained. I tried to calm her down, but my voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. She shoved past me, shoulder-checking me hard enough to make me stumble. No one reacted. No one stepped in. And in that moment, I understood the truth I'd been avoiding for years. They weren't protecting me. They never had. I went home afterward and sat alone in the dark, replaying everything. The bruises. The excuses. The silence. I felt stupid for believing loyalty would ever be returned. For believing love meant endurance. That night, I seriously wondered if disappearing completely would be easier than living like this. And that thought scared me more than anything she'd ever done. Because once you hit that low, something has to change. After that night, I stopped going home. Not dramatically. Not with an announcement. I just didn't show up. I let calls ring out. I replied to texts hours later with short, careful answers. For the first time in my life, I chose distance without asking permission, and the silence that followed was both terrifying and relieving. But distance didn't bring peace right away. It brought memories. With space came clarity, and with clarity came the full weight of everything I'd normalized. The shoves. The threats. The way my parents' fear had always mattered more than my safety. I started writing things down late at night, almost without thinking. Dates. Incidents. Words she used. How my parents reacted. Or didn't. Seeing it all in one place made my stomach turn. This wasn't family drama. This was abuse. And I had been the buffer that allowed it to continue. For days, I didn't tell anyone. I was still trained to protect the image, to keep things contained. But one evening, I met a close friend for coffee, someone who'd known me for years but only from the outside. He asked why I looked so tired. I opened my mouth to brush it off like I always did, and then, for the first time, I didn't. The words came out clumsy and rushed. I told him about my sister. About the shove. About my parents. About how I felt trapped in a role I never agreed to. I expected disbelief. Minimization. Awkward silence. Instead, he just stared at me and said, "That's not normal. That's not okay." Something cracked open in my chest. I felt embarrassed for not seeing it sooner. Angry for being conditioned not to. Relieved that someone finally said it out loud. When I went home that night, I cried harder than I had in years, not from pain alone, but from validation. Of course, my family noticed the shift. My mom started calling more. My dad sent messages asking if I was mad. My sister left a voicemail that was half apology, half warning, saying, "Don't make this a bigger thing than it needs to be." And listening to that message, heart pounding, I realized the truth was already bigger than any of them wanted to admit. The only question left was what would happen when I stopped keeping it buried. The confrontation didn't happen the way I'd imagined it 100 times in my head. There was no perfect speech, no calm family meeting where everyone finally listened. It started with a message from my mom that simply said, "We need to talk. This can't keep going like this." For once, I agreed. We met at my parents' house on a Sunday afternoon. The windows were open, letting in cold air, and the house felt smaller than I remembered. My sister was already there, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed, jaw tight. The tension was thick before anyone even spoke. My mom started by saying how worried she was about the family. My dad talked about how stressful everything had been lately. Then my sister rolled her eyes and said, "Can we stop being dramatic?" That was it. Something in me snapped, not violently, but decisively. I told them I was done being the buffer. I said the words out loud, slowly, my voice shaking but steady. I talked about the shove. The threats. The fear. I said I wouldn't be coming over anymore if she couldn't control herself. I didn't accuse. I didn't yell. I just told the truth. My sister laughed. Actually laughed. "Wow," she said, clapping once sarcastically. "You really want to play the victim now?" She turned to my parents, waiting for backup. They hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. My mom finally said, "She's just having a hard time," and my dad added, "You know how sensitive she is." I felt something inside me go cold. This was the moment I'd spent my whole life preparing for without realizing it. I stood up. My hands were trembling, but my decision wasn't. I told them I loved them, but I wouldn't be part of this anymore. That I wouldn't sacrifice my safety to keep the peace. That if they wanted a relationship with me, it would have to be separate from her. No one stopped me when I walked out. In the car, my chest burned, and my vision blurred, but beneath the fear was something new. Relief. Grief. Power. I knew I had just changed everything. And I also knew they weren't going to accept it quietly. The backlash didn't take long. Less than 24 hours after I walked out, my phone started lighting up. Missed calls from my mom. Long texts from my dad. And then, a message from my sister that made my stomach drop. "So this is how you're doing it now? Turning everyone against me?" I didn't reply. That silence felt dangerous, like stepping off a cliff without knowing how far the drop was. The next few days were a blur of guilt and anger being thrown at me from every direction. My mom accused me of tearing the family apart. My dad warned me that my sister was not doing well, and that I'd regret this if something happened to her. Every message carried the same undertone: "This is your fault." My sister escalated fast. She showed up unannounced at my apartment one evening, pounding on the door so hard my neighbor cracked theirs open to check. I stayed inside, heart racing, listening as she shouted my name, calling me a traitor, a liar, a coward. She screamed that I owed her, that I'd ruined everything. When I didn't open the door, she hissed, "You're going to regret this," before storming off. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. Every sound made me jump. But something strange happened in the middle of that fear. I didn't cave. For the first time, I wasn't rushing in to fix it. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't absorbing the damage. My parents begged me to just talk to her so things could calm down. I told them no. My voice shook, but I said it anyway. I reminded them of the shove. Of the threats. Of everything I'd finally said out loud. There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. When my mom finally spoke, her voice was small. I didn't realize it was that bad. I hung up and sat there, hands shaking, realizing this was the moment they'd always tried to avoid. The moment where denial stopped working. And deep down, I knew the worst was still coming, because my sister had never handled losing control well. What I didn't expect was how fast everything unraveled once I stopped covering for her. Without me stepping in, smoothing things over, or absorbing the fallout, her behavior had nowhere to hide. The cracks that I'd spent years plastering over started showing to everyone else. It began with my parents calling me, not to accuse or guilt me this time, but sounding shaken. My sister had gone off on a family friend during a visit, screaming over a small comment, throwing a glass against the wall. There was no warning. No filter. And this time, no me to redirect the blast. The friend left early, visibly rattled. Word spread faster than my parents could contain it. Then came the neighbors. Complaints. A late-night argument that got loud enough for someone to call it in. Nothing serious enough for consequences yet, but serious enough that my parents couldn't pretend it was just stress anymore. Every story they told me sounded painfully familiar, like echoes of moments I'd lived through alone. My mom's voice trembled when she finally said, "She said some really awful things to me." I closed my eyes, leaning back against the wall, feeling something bittersweet settle in my chest. Not satisfaction. Not revenge. Just confirmation. This was what I'd been carrying for years. My sister tried one last time to pull me back in. She sent a long message late at night, swinging wildly between apologies and blame. "I'm sorry if I hurt you, but you know how I am. If you really loved me, you wouldn't do this. You're abandoning me just like everyone else." I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to my parents with a simple line, "This is what I've been dealing with." There was no immediate reply. For the first time, the truth didn't need me to defend it. It was standing on its own, undeniable, finally seen. And as heavy as that realization was, it came with something I'd never felt before in my family. Relief. Because the story was no longer just mine to carry, and I knew the final chapter was close. The final shift didn't come with an apology. It didn't come with accountability or some movie-style breakthrough where my sister suddenly understood the damage she'd done. It came quietly, in the form of distance, and the strange peace that followed it. My parents eventually stopped calling every day. When they did reach out, the conversations were careful, almost fragile. They no longer asked me to fix anything. They didn't ask me to come over when things got bad. For the first time, they were dealing with the reality they'd spent years avoiding. And while part of me grieved that it took my absence for them to see it, another part of me finally felt free. I haven't seen my sister since. I've heard things through the family, new conflicts, new explosions, the same patterns repeating without a buffer to soften the impact. But those stories don't pull me back in anymore. They don't own me. I've learned that stepping away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. There are days I still feel the weight of guilt. Years of conditioning don't disappear overnight. Sometimes I catch myself wondering if I should check in, smooth things over, make it easier for everyone. Then I remember the wall against my back. The silence after the shove. The way no one asked if I was okay. And I remind myself why I chose this. My life is quieter now. Not perfect. Not magically healed. But safe. I sleep through the night. My phone doesn't fill me with dread. I'm building relationships where love doesn't require me to disappear or bleed quietly for the comfort of others. I used to think protecting my family was my purpose. That endurance was proof of love. I was wrong. The hardest lesson I've ever learned is this. Sometimes the most loyal thing you can do is stop sacrificing yourself for people who never planned to protect you back. And walking away wasn't the end of my family story. It was the beginning of my own.